Hey guys, and welcome back. Today I have a really special treat for you. Denise over at In Liquid Color and I have been talking for a little while about doing a specific watercolor collab, and we finally decided that we would do a little bit of a style swap, but with one extra detail. We have to use a specific watercolor sample from the other artist's collection. So what I have in here is a little watercolor sample from Denise herself, and I am pretty excited and also a little nervous to figure out what color she has gifted to me to try out. So the way this collab is going to work is I need to try to duplicate her style and paint in a way that she does, and I have to use this color in the painting. And similarly over on her channel, I gave her a little bit of a sample from my watercolor stash, and she has to try to duplicate my style over on her channel. So when you're done with this video, make sure to click on over to check out what she worked on. And I haven't seen it yet, and I'm really excited to see both her reaction to the paint color that I sampled to her, but also just to see what she created. So as many of you know, I'm sure, In Liquid Color, or Denise, is a fantastic watercolor resource here to the art community on YouTube, and she knows so much about watercolor and how to use it, as well as paper and other supplies, and she creates somewhat realistic but still very beautiful flowy watercolor animal pieces because she is very passionate about animal conservation. If you guys are new to my channel, I also like to paint animals, and I do incorporate a lot of plants and other kind of whimsical themes in my illustrations. So let's open this up and see what we have. Let's take a look. Oh, looks like we have a Daniel Smith burnt sienna. Oh, and more beautiful washi tape. Oh my goodness. So even though I draw a lot of natural things, pretty much mostly plants, I don't tend to use browns all that much. I'm trying to incorporate them a little bit more, but definitely I prefer something more on the cooler side rather than warm, and this is a fairly warm color. So yeah, Daniel Smith, which I only have a few samples and tubes in my collection of Daniel Smith, so I'm excited to use that. Well, I guess I'm gonna have this in my stash for a while. And this is made with PBR7. I still am learning a ton about pigments and what goes into making watercolors, and if you are at all more interested or have questions in that realm, Denise's channel is where you need to go. But hopefully you'll stick with me and see what I create with this. So I decided to use my Schmincke palette and just kind of add it in there, especially since there's a little extra space, and test out mixing this color with all the other colors in my normal palette that I've been using recently. And just as another refresher, here are some more gorgeous pieces by Denise, and this is just to give you a little bit more of a taste of the kind of work she does. There's sort of a flowy background, color, and there's a lot of more neutrals and browns here too. And so that was something I was keeping in mind with creating this piece, and I wanted to pick an animal that would work super well for this burnt sienna, even though this color is just so versatile that I could really pick just about any animal and nature scene to use it with. So here I am mixing it with a lot of my colors in my palette to see what kind of beautiful colors I can get. A lot of them are a lot more neutral than I typically would use in my work, and I mean, this is a fairly neutral color and on the warmer side, and so it was fun to see what colors I could get. So I decided to pick something that was from Africa, since I know Denise has been to Africa and is a favorite place of hers. And so I wanted to pick an animal, this gazelle, to draw. And in the bottom left corner, I figured I would keep my reference photo there for you just to see how closely I could get the realism here. And again, I don't want it to be perfectly realistic. I want there to be a little bit of expression there and a little bit of flair like Denise adds to her pieces. But I did want to show you what I had to work with because I really wanted to stick to a reference photo and do something a little outside of my typical art style comfort zone. That being said, I did want to mention that this entire activity and painting really reminded me of doing still life back in art classes that I have taken that are just really tremendous and hopeful exercises where you really are trying to look at what colors and values are there rather than what you think the colors should be. And this is something that's a little hard to describe, but I remember working pretty hard in my brain to look at what colors are actually there rather than just looking at this photo and thinking, oh, well, it's this orange or it's this. I know gazelles are this color, therefore I'm going to paint it this way. I really wanted to break down what individual colors and pieces I'm seeing rather than what my brain is interpreting. I don't know if I explained that super well, but I just found that both in this exercise and when I've taken other still life courses and assignments in other classes, that is one of those things that is a little hard to wrap my head around when I was first learning, but was so helpful because you really need to understand a lot of fundamentals in art, and that is something that is so helpful even if you go into a different kind of art style and break the rules like I typically prefer doing in my work, where I sort of like to bend the rules of color a little bit. But I do find that I get a little stuck with my color scheme here and there, and I've been wanting to break out of that. And so this was actually a really fantastic, like a perfect time for me to work on this, because I've actually been taking classes having to do with color theory through Skillshare and other things like that to help educate myself. And really committing to this collaboration got me to sit down and really rework those muscles of looking at more of a realistic color palette. I found it a little funny that my typical colors that I gravitate toward are on the cooler side, and for this piece I definitely went overly warm in the beginning, and you'll see toward the end I do add some layered yellow, I believe lemon yellow, on top of the fur to cool the piece down just a little bit, because there is quite a bit of yellow in the reference photo. I also wanted to mention a little bit of a difference in what I typically use for tools. This brush is actually quite large. It's a 12 round brush, which is a lot bigger than what I typically use, although I am gravitating more and more toward larger brushes, but it's by far the softest brush I have, and I picked that on purpose to help facilitate a more flowy feel, and especially with going in layer by layer, wanting them to be nice and soft and not be too harsh when they overlap. And especially in the background, I wanted to have a nice soft flow to the colors, and so I decided to go with this softer brush to help with that. It was by no means a requirement, but I think I ended up using the burnt sienna mixed in with just about every single color I used. I think there might be just a little bit where I add a mixture that has a little bit more lemon yellow and maybe not any of the burnt sienna, but I'm pretty sure I used it for just about every mix, and that was simply because I could see it in every single part of the photo, at least a little bit, and so it was really interesting to play around with that and realize how versatile this color is, especially when painting a subject like this in a more realistic way. The texture on these antlers were probably the hardest part to get right, and I definitely didn't want it to be, I guess, too overly hyper-realistic, but I did want the texture to come through and the lighting to at least look correct from where the lighting is coming from above, from the sun. And it was interesting how much time this actually took me to add in these colors. I really wanted to be quick and flowy with it, but it did take a little bit of calculation. And I actually wanted to mention that I think my favorite neutral or almost black color was mixing the burnt sienna with my Payne's gray bluish color from Schmincke, and I found that that gets me a really nice, almost perfect neutral, at least in my opinion. Just a slightly warmer neutral than I would typically use, but was really, really useful for adding to these antlers as well as the other darker parts of the gazelle. As you'll see, I rely heavily on layering for this piece, and I feel like that I might have layered a little bit more than Denise typically would in her work, but I think that was kind of the safer way for me to go with it. I haven't studied her technique super intensely, but from what I've gathered, I feel like she has a slightly better idea of how to kind of mix some of the colors on the page, what colors need to go where, and I just couldn't go into it so confidently, and so I relied a little bit more on slightly more transparent layers over and over. And this was probably the scariest part of this piece for me. I just love how Denise paints these gorgeous flowy backgrounds where it just hints at a little bit of color differentiation and that background, and kind of sets the animal in a scene without distracting from the beautiful textures and details of the subject itself. And so I really wanted to mimic this flowy color sort of shape that faded off and was a little bit darker and more contrasting around the animal itself, which I've seen her do. And it was pretty scary, but I actually watched specifically her chameleon video and a few others where she discusses her technique for that, and that was actually really helpful. And that was another big reason I had this larger flowy brush that holds a lot of water, and I just felt like I could control the gradient a little bit more and let the color flow. And so I end up going over it just a little bit more later on to bump up the contrast, especially surrounding the gazelle. And I did want to add a little bit of breaking the frame with these extra branches, I guess, and I did add a little extra, as you can see, for a little bit of artistic flair, but I was actually pleasantly surprised with how well the paint flowed out in the green background, and I probably didn't add as much texture as I could have compared to a lot of pieces that Denise does, where she'll put some paint splatter and this and that, but that was what I created, was honestly as much as I could take for creating that sort of background. I feel like I definitely am working toward being a little bit of a looser painter with that sort of thing, but as you'll see with a lot of my pieces, I like having harsher line work, even if it's not black, but having a little bit of harsher line work with at least colored pencil or ink. And that isn't something that Denise typically does, so I had to push a little bit there. And my backgrounds, I typically will have some sort of frame that's a little bit harsher, even if the animal or the subject breaks that a little bit. I actually really like the breaking the frame thing, which I did do in this piece, and that was really nice to do. I feel like visually and compositionally that adds a lot of interest. And yeah, I'm not used to sort of flowing the color out to a nice clean gradient to the white of the paper, and it's not perfectly faded out. I didn't want it to be completely perfect and a seamless transition, but I did want there to be some gradient there that I was just a little bit afraid to do, but I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and I like my addition of some extra branches. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the piece. I think I didn't quite get it as cool as the photo, but here I'm adding in some gel pen for the eyelashes and some extra white details. But that is pretty much the final touches. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure to head over to Denise's channel and check out what she created using my style and the watercolor that I provided for her. I'm really excited to see what she created, and I hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoy art videos similar to this, as well as fun art topics that I like to talk about here on my channel, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like, because that really does help me out. As always, I hope you guys have a creatively fulfilled day, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.